All right, we are here for another exciting episode of Business Learning Lab, where Meredith and I share all of our missteps, failures, blunders in our lengthy entrepreneurial careers in hopes that we can save you from making the mistakes that we made, because often those mistakes are very expensive. But we've certainly learned a lot of lessons along the way. Today, we're going to talk about whether or not you are playing the role of business owner or CEO in your business. And we're talking about this today because Meredith recently had a bit of a struggle and an epiphany. And it was such a great reminder to us about how those roles are distinctly different and how knowing what role and why you're in that role is so important to your business. So Meredith, I want you to tell your story and then we'll unpack it a little bit.
All right. So the gist of it is around the last few months with running this new company, Move Forward Virtual Assistants, I have been taking on all of the internal stuff. That's always how, we divide it up. Jen kind of does the external, I do the internal. And so with a company with employees, that means HR. And so I was like doing all this HR function, all the staff stuff, payroll and benefits and all kinds of stuff. Well, it's all very far outside my natural wheelhouse. There is, a lot of details and follow up and all this kind of stuff that is just not my strong suit. So, plus just first time doing all of this, first time having employees, first time buying a company, having to take over, whatever. So there was lots of challenges and lots of issues and stuff started to get, I don't even know, like I felt like, we'll just talk about it at the time. I felt like I was making a lot of mistakes and I felt like I was underperforming and that I was letting people down. I felt like I was letting you down, Jen. I felt like I was letting the staff down. There was an issue where like our dental insurance was like lapsed because of like a clerical error that I felt like I should have known, but like whatever. So I was getting really stressed, massively stressed out. I was cranky. I wasn't enjoying any part of the work. And it was in a conversation in a completely different context that I realized that the word I would have used to define myself in that moment, I was talking about myself as a CEO, and the word that came out was failure, which was a surprise to me. That's not something I'm used to, a label I'm used to putting on myself, just because I'm usually good at giving myself grace and knowing what is acceptable. So it was kind of like a big light bulb moment of like, oh my gosh, this is why I've been so upset. This is why I've been so stressed out. And of course, the practical thing is when you get into that spiral, it gets harder and harder to recover, and it gets harder to do the work because you don't want to do it and you feel bad. It was harder and harder for me to like dive in on these problems because I was feeling so incompetent. That's it, incompetent.
Well, then we talked because you shared, because you're like, I just realized that through this other conversation that I was feeling like a failure as a CEO. And I was like, well, that's because you weren't in the CEO role. You were acting as a business owner, because here we have this brand new, behemoth, and not behemoth is probably too strong of a word, but it's a big, bigger company than Sparent in terms of, having employees. And there's just, like you said, a lot more to it. But here you were thrust into the business owner role. We were so used to being in the CEO role over at Sparent because things are just kind of, rocking and rolling pretty smoothly over there. But here we are, and we had to play some business owner roles. And that is why you had to jump into that role, because we weren't quite ready to outsource, to a full-time HR person. But what was great about realizing this is that, you weren't a bad CEO. You were being a good business owner by filling this role that we needed filled. The buck stops with us, right? Mm-hmm. But now we're in a position where, okay, it's now time to take that off your plate. We've bootstrapped a little bit here, but we don't need to bootstrap forever. And as soon as we have resources, we delegate. And so this is something where we have the resources to delegate. We've been in touch with HR companies and to, do like a sort of a fractional HR arrangement. So this will hopefully be in Meredith's rearview mirror. But it was interesting to realize that, oh, like, yeah, of course, this makes sense that we are doing things we wouldn't normally do in our role as CEO, but they needed to be done. And when we first bought the company back in June, we've shared before, there were some operational issues that were affecting the bottom line. And it took us a few months to do our operational magic and really turn the company around so that it's profitable and that we have a healthy cash flow and so that we can, afford to continue growing the company and, stepping into our roles as CEO. So yeah, I felt so terribly that you felt like a failure because I never felt like you were failing. I was like, because a lot of what was going on was a company, not our company failure, but the vendor that we were using for our benefits coverage was just a hot mess. Like they just, bordering on unprofessional, definitely some incompetence and anyway, I won't bore you with all those gory details, but it wasn't like anybody doing like if I was handling that, I would not have had any better of an outcome, probably a worse outcome, because I'm terrible with paperwork. But yeah, I felt so bad that you felt like a failure, but I feel like it's better to feel like you were not a failure as a CEO, but you were like, oh, I was just outside of my zone of genius, outside of my zone of excellence. I was plugging a hole in the dam,
Right.
because it had, the dam had some holes to plug.
Yeah.
But now we've had some structural engineers come in, me and you, and so now we can we don't have to plug holes anymore. We can,
Exactly.
get the professionals that do that for a living to do that.
Yes. And now, like a week out from having this revelation, and also some of those issues are getting resolved anyway, the problems that we're having, but it just drove home the point of how essential mindset is. And we talk about that all the time. And, in everything we do, we talk about the difference in like business owner versus CEO versus employee mindset. And it's so true because the reason I was having like all of this stress, and it was like a psychic disconnect between who I saw myself as and who I understood myself as, and how I was rating my performance. They were not lining up. And that is unfamiliar because for years working in Sparent and in my other company, Eaton Press, I've been working very well as a CEO, like top level, everything smooth. I'm performing at the level I expect of myself, which doesn't mean perfection. It means I know what my weaknesses are. And when I fall into them, I'm not surprised and I roll with it and, that kind of thing. And so it had been a long time since I'd had this like level of psychic disconnect in who I thought I was, how I thought I should perform, and what I saw as the outcomes of what my actions were. But it was because I was looking at myself as an incompetent CEO. And so everything was through that lens. But if I had been looking at it as a business owner, doing what needs to be done and doing a perfectly sufficient job at it, right? It doesn't go back and change it, make it, oh, now I was actually very successful at it. Like the outcome was the outcome. Like the problems were the problems. They're still there. But as a business owner, I was acting outside my zone of genius, as you said. And as such, I was quite sufficient.
You did pretty darn well, Meredith, considering everything.
Yeah. So, and that's how you were seeing me. That's why you weren't critical of my performance, because you were seeing me as a perfectly sufficient business owner who rose to the occasion. And being a bad business owner or performing poorly as a business owner, I think would have looked like me refusing to do any of it. Right?
Exactly. Like neglecting it, putting your head in the sand, not wanting to deal with it, letting things like, not be handled, not getting on the phone, not, sending in additional paperwork, even though we've sent it in 5 times. That would be a bad business owner. So I'm so glad we've sort of come full circle on this. We've always, I don't know, I've heard this a lot. Well, as a business owner, you wear a lot of hats. Well, as a CEO, you don't.
Right.
right?
And that's
As a CEO, you do a lot less than a business owner.
mhm,
And it's a process. I mean, we're bootstrapping entrepreneurs, and that's who we think, we mostly work with and talk to on this channel. And when you're a bootstrapping entrepreneur, you do wear all the hats at a certain phase in your business. When you're just getting started, the key is to know when to take those hats off and start putting them on other people's heads, so that are able to step into that role of CEO, where you're really just steering the ship and executing your vision.
mhm,
And that's a really important role for the longevity of your company. So I think that is the key. When I see business owners struggling, it's typically because they do have a business that has growth momentum, but they can't get past, usually it's like the 6-figure mark, the low 6 figures. They can't get past the hump because they're still wearing all the hats,
mhm.
and they're having a hard time letting go of control and putting hats on other people's heads. So, yeah, so we kind of and you will go back and forth a little bit, depending. Like, our inflection point was this purchase of this business. So we had to, put a couple hats back on our heads and play the role of business owner, because ultimately it is our the business is our responsibility, and we can't shirk responsibilities when we don't have the resources, to bring in, people to fill certain roles that aren't, CEO jobs. So yeah, I thought it was a good revisit of a lesson that we've learned before, but it's
Yeah. And it was kind of a 2-in-1 lesson in some ways, because not only did it remind us about wearing the different hats and the different, importance of the different roles, but also the consequences of like psychic distress or mental distress, right? It was exhausting. It was so stressful. It was dragging me down. It was making me not like anything about running Move Forward, because I was seeing it all wrapped up in this crappy work that I don't like to do.
I
And
know,
it's
I saw it, and I can't have that. That's worse. That's more damaging than even if you had been incompetent with all of that paperwork, all of the paperwork. That is much more damaging, and that's why remember I was like, oh, I set up this meeting with an HR company.
yeah,
I was like, I was like, we've got to get this off your plate, because I can't have you, like, we're firm believers that work should be joyful and not stressful, and we have to live those, values ourselves. So I was like, oh, Meredith's stressed. Well, we need to fix this right away.
and it was, and there's a point at which, so we're fortunate enough that we had gotten the company to a place where we had enough budget, we had the ability to now have money go towards paying someone to do these things. But at the same time, like, I was at such a place that I had, right about minutes before you announced you'd set up this meeting, I was about to say, I will cut my salary in half. I will by 80%, I don't care, so that we can hire someone to do some of the stuff, because I can't do this anymore. And that would have been like, that would have been something we would have had to explore if we didn't have other money, because I couldn't continue in that way. You know what I mean? I wouldn't have been able to go on. And so, and so we could have made a less responsible decision. Like, we could have said, well, we're not going to give the raises that we promised the staff until we've got all this other staff in place. So we're not going to do bonuses or blah, 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 any of that other stuff. We chose to, put all the stuff in place financially for the team for various reasons, and then pay ourselves, then outsource these other things, because we didn't know I was going to lose my mind. I was going to have this complete mental breakdown over this topic. So, but also now we know, right? If we buy another company, if we go forward, we will have that as an upfront non-negotiable. I'm never going to be an HR person ever again.
Yeah, we had that. Yeah, I mean, we learned so much. Like, yeah, we know what we need to be put in place. We have to factor that into the budget for any future acquisition, if that ever happens again. So yeah, I always say, one thing I love about being an entrepreneur and a business owner is that you're always learning, and you never know it all. And I love learning, and I love learning lessons. And this one wasn't a super expensive one financially, but it was an expensive one in the sense that, you were stressed, and, any amount of stress is not okay. So, yeah, I'm glad we could fix that.
Me too. Me too. Absolutely. So, yeah. And now it's all fine. It's all good. And our employees have all their benefits
Yeah,
reinstated. So, and
everyone.
another example, just we talk about, the different roles and different hats. So, like the CEO job is to now look at all the bids for new benefit plans,
Mhm.
and we'll make decisions about that. And we have brokers who will initiate and execute on that. And we'll have an HR person who handles the staff version of it. But like that just is an aside of how we break that down. So it's not that we'll have nothing to do with benefits, for example. We're just going to go big picture. What do we want? And then someone else is handling all the details from that point on.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to go. Well, I love this business learning lab lesson, Meredith. I would love to hear from anyone who's watching this how you balance being a business owner and CEO. If you've struggled, if you're still a business owner and you want to transition into a CEO, delegation is absolutely the path to get there. We own a virtual assistant agency. If you go to sparent.co, there is a discovery call link. If you even just want to chat and just talk about what you need to put in place so that your delegation ready, we're always happy to talk to business owners who are ready and willing to delegate. So we hope you'll get in touch with us. We will see you again at the next Business Learning Lab. And at some point, we're going to talk, I don't know if it's the next one, but we're going to talk about the myth of the hustle. And I think that actually will be the next one now that I've said that. And I think that's going to be a really interesting topic. So until next time, bye, everybody.